Hello race fans, Keith Collentine here, very pleased to bring you our first look at the long-awaited new Formula 1 management game called, appropriately enough, F1 Manager. It's been more than 20 years since the last officially licensed F1 management game. In that time there have been plenty of unofficial browser-based games and the officially licensed, but it must be said, rather forgettable mobile manager F1 Clash. As recently as 2017, Sega flirted with this genre, releasing the impressive Motorsport Manager by PlaySport Games. But there hasn't been a full-fat management sim based around the world's most popular motorsport since the likes of old classics like Grand Prix Manager 2 or Grand Prix World. Anyone who's wanted to take control of one of the same 10 teams they see compete every Grand Prix weekend has had to wait a long time for the opportunity. Now, players will finally get the chance to assume the role of team principal for themselves. So when Frontier Developments invited race fans to their Cambridge studios to get a hands-on preview of their brand new F1 Manager 22, the one thing we most wanted to know was, is this the F1 management simulation game players have been waiting a long time for? F1 Manager 22 will allow players to take charge of any of the 10 existing Formula 1 teams and try to bring them up to compete for both the Drivers' and the Constructors' Championships over multiple seasons. The game will come out in August for PC, Xbox One and Series SX, and PlayStation 4 and 5, and the Frontier team promised the game will offer the same core experience for PC and console players. All the systems and all the menus have been designed to work just as well with a controller as with a keyboard and a mouse. Now, to preempt a few inevitable questions, no, you won't be able to create your own team in the game. And also, once you've chosen which of the 10 teams to play as, you're locked into that one for that save and can't switch between different teams if you fancy a different challenge or if you get fired. Some will be disappointed by those limitations, but in our first look, we found more than enough depth to the gameplay to give you a satisfying challenge whichever team you pick. So, could F1 Manager become the gold standard in motorsport management games in the way Football Manager is for soccer? The early signs are encouraging. Every part of the game oozes authenticity, with a slick menu system which looks like it was designed by FOM's graphics team themselves. That's especially good as you'll spend a lot of time wading through them. But if anything, F1 Manager 22 offers a more convincing look and feel for an official F1 product than even Codemaster's long-running racing series does at times. All aspects of your team fall under your control, negotiating sponsorship contracts, developing new parts for your car, and improving your team's facilities, such as your wind tunnel or simulator. There's a lot you have to consider as a team principal, especially under the pressures of the budget cap pressing down on every decision. The impressive driver roster in the game includes not just the 20 Formula 1 drivers, but also the entire Formula 2 and Formula 3 championship fields, all available to scout, hire and develop using experience points gained from driving. As the seasons progress through your save, AI-generated drivers, known as regens in the world of Football Manager, will fill the gaps created when the real-world drivers retire or leave the junior formulae. Beyond just the drivers, F1 Manager 22 also boasts real-world technical staff, such as designers and race engineers who are all rated based on their perceived abilities. Drivers and race engineers do have relationships that require nurturing to make them effective, but, for example, if you take charge of Williams and wave enough cash at Peter Bonington, you could lure him away from Lewis Hamilton's side. As you'd expect, the game is rich in data. Frontier have even hired a former Alpine data analyst to help crunch the numbers that drive their virtual F1 world. As you can see, the F1 Manager 22 team has paid close attention to ensuring the on-track action lives up to the series' high standings. It's built in Unreal Engine, and all sessions, practice, qualifying and races can be watched in full either through TV-style cameras or by cycling through onboard views. The result is impressive. Circuits and cars alike are rendered in genuine high fidelity, and while the animations of the cars racing side by side aren't quite as convincing as they are in, for example, F1 2021, the effect is more than good enough to let you suspend your disbelief and pretend you're watching a real broadcast. The sheer volume of data and information in F1 Manager can be a little overwhelming at first, but the actions you can choose to take during the sessions are relatively limited. You can tell your drivers how hard to push their tyres, whether to adopt any fuel saving techniques, what energy recovery mode they should use. Thankfully, the drivers are autonomous enough that you don't need to give them basic commands like use DRS or overtake that back marker.
No more DRS. Copy that.
One of our favourite features is that when you give your drivers commands, their real-world engineer relays the message.
Okay, recharge on, recharge on. Copy that.
For example, if you want to tell Fernando Alonso to save fuel, you'll hear an actual radio message from his race engineer Carol Luce, taken from the FOM broadcast archives, telling his driver to lift and coast please Fernando, and Alonso's response. This clever use of FOM's archive material goes a long way to immersing you into the game. The more laps your team covers in practice, the more confident your drivers will be in their setup for race day. For each circuit, you can customize and save multiple bespoke pit strategies that will be there the following season. But just as in real life, races do not always go to plan. Safety cars and even red flag stoppages are emulated, which you'll have to react to just as the strategists on the pit wall do. When you're hunting down 6th place on the final lap, only to have your driver lock up under braking for Baku's tight first turn and end their race in the barriers, you'll realise just how emotionally invested you've become in the outcome, even if it's just a game.
Push.
Races are full Grand Prix distance, but you can play them at double speed if you wish, or even faster. You can accelerate it up to 16 times speed, but from 4 times up and faster, you're limited to a 2-dimensional view of the action. But whenever an incident happens on track, such as an overtaking move or a retirement, you'll have the opportunity to watch an instant replay of the action, featuring a short clip of your mechanics reacting to whatever just happened back in the garage. Despite the largely impressive attention to detail, Frontier have made a few deliberate design choices which prioritise gameplay at the expense of realism. For example, there aren't any junior driver academies in the game, so you are, if you're running Mercedes, free to try and sign Arthur Leclerc, even if he is a Ferrari Academy driver in reality. Also, if you choose to take charge of Aston Martin, the new factory that the team is building in the real world is not reflected in the game. You'll have to manually invest in building up your facilities, just as you do with any of the other teams. The car models are also generic and not bespoke to each team, and if you introduce new parts to your car, those are not reflected visually in the game. These may prove to be only minor concerns for those who've been waiting over 2 decades for a game like this. And with the release date in the end of August now confirmed, it will not be too long until players can get their hands on the debut entry on what is confirmed to be a yearly new franchise. Thank you very much for watching. We look forward to bringing you our in-depth final review of F1 Manager once we played the finished game. To make sure you don't miss it, follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram using @racefans.net, and of course, hit subscribe now so you get our latest videos as soon as they appear.